Hello and welcome. I am Maranda Miller, and this is my amazing, talented, awesome husband, Luther. And we are coming at you today through a journey we want to share with you. We're going to share a little bit. We're going to open our hearts up to you guys. We're going to tell you a little bit of our story, and we're going to talk about religion. Okay? This is our journey through religion, our experience, and into what I call as a promised land. I truly believe that there is a God, the God of the Bible, Jehovah, so many names that you can give him, and he has been called, and he's amazing, that he has a land that's your promised land for you. It's a land where you thrive, you do well. Yes, you still have struggles in life. Yes, you have things that are hard. But it's a land where you are moving forward in life, you're making progress, you're growing in your relationship with him, your family dynamics, your relationships at home are growing and thriving, you're having success in areas of life, you know where you're going in life, and you know what you're here to do. It's like life becomes a whole, oh man, life becomes...
It's a saga for sure.
Yeah, it's an interesting journey. It becomes fun.
Yes.
So this is our journey. This is our story. Like I said, we're going to be real with you. We're going to be honest. We're not going to hold back from you guys, because we want you guys to learn from us. And I just pray that God uses this video to help you discover in you where you could be maybe stuck, where maybe some mindsets of some religions and things you've been taught may be holding you back. First, before we kind of dig in, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what religion is. So religion is really just, it's a belief system. A belief, the power of the mind is amazing. And what you listen to builds a belief, and your experiences in life also build a belief as well. So it's from what you've been told, what you've been taught, and your experiences. That is what creates a belief system in your head. And to really become free, to go to the next level, and when you hit walls, to really become free, you begin to change the way you think. And our goal for this video is to help you maybe notice some areas in your life where you have built some beliefs that maybe need to be changed a little bit. This is part one. We are going to do 2 parts. So I encourage you to watch it fully and then jump to part 2, because I would hate for you to miss something that's really important, and the best is actually going to be in part 2. This is laying the foundation for part 2. So that is what a belief system is, and it really is in the mind. That's what religion is based off of. So we want to shift you out of a religious mindset to really get you into your promised land, get you to where you want to go, give you the skills to get you there. A religion is a system of faith and worship. That's really what it is. It's a system, okay? And so we're going to talk about our journey. We're going to share some of the really hard stuff we faced and some of the really good stuff we've had. And then where we are now, which a lot of that you'll catch in part 2. But really to let you guys know the journey we grew up in as children is really part, because your past is a very important part for you of your life. That is what creates your story, is what you grew up with. The pain, the hurt, and even the fun stuff. Maybe it was like a really good childhood, and that's amazing, because that's a good foundation for you. That's our goal for our children. We don't want them to have to know the journey we came through. We're laying a new foundation in them. So no matter what your past is, it's a part of your story, it's a part of your journey, and it's what creates you. So I'm going to let my amazing husband start off by sharing his past, his journey, how he grew up as a child, and what got him to where he is, where he is today. You'll find out on part 2.
So, thanks, babe.
Yeah.
Wow, going back, it's been a lot. So where do I start? So as a young boy, grew up in kind of a Christian home, and I say kind of just because there was a lot of dysfunctional things that were going on in our household when I was growing up. Lots of divorce, some abuse, different things like that. Not really going to get into all of that, just to say that it was kind of a turbulent time for me, and I was kind of an emotional child, I guess. I don't know. I was very withdrawn.
What kid is not, though? If you think about it, really, your younger years help train your emotions.
Yeah.
Should help train your emotions.
So I was pretty withdrawn, just because of everything that was going on. Struggled with a lot of depression and things like that, and I remember one of my first encounters, and maybe that's a good place to start. One of my first encounters with God's Spirit, His presence, I didn't even know what it was at that time, was actually at a summer camp. And, we're doing all that kid craft stuff and just all the summer camp stuff that every kid does, whoever goes to summer camp. And I remember, counselors probably hated this, but I was always taken off. I was always breaking away from the group, always wanted to be by myself. They'd have to come find me because, they don't want a lost kid on their report. But I remember one of these times I just took off and I was out in the woods, just kind of on the outskirts of the camp. And I'd figure out how to take these little twigs and I could put them together, and I would take a little blade of like long beach grass or something and tie them together, and I'd make these little crosses. And I would do that for hours, just making little crosses. And I'm not, at this point, it's like I heard about Jesus, but it was a Sunday school story. It didn't have any depth, right, in my little spirit. But I remember when I would do that, there was like this peace. It felt like I always felt safe and secure, and it's so hard to describe. How do you describe the presence of God? It's just this peace, this comfort, this knowing that someone is there but nobody's there kind of thing, right? And I remember experiencing that as a child, and that drew me. That's why I'd always take off. I would always want to be by myself, especially out in nature. That's just special for me, even today. As an adult, I go out in the woods, I go out in nature, and you can really experience, at least for me, I can really experience God's presence, just like when I was a little boy. So that was one of my first encounters with God. So growing up, again, lots of turbulent stuff in the home. My father was a minister. He did a lot of prison ministry, a lot of itinerant ministry, which is... aside from the prison ministry, we do itinerant ministry too. So in that regard, I'm following in his footsteps. But I remember him really struggling with kind of finding his place in the Christian experience, finding his place in what we would call like traditional ministry. Like my father, I can be very outspoken, very bold. And sometimes that tends to rub people the wrong way.
But it's a good thing.
Yeah.
It is a good thing.
But I think, in his case, I think that really made it difficult for him to find his place in ministry, to find that acceptance that he was looking for.
As we talk further on, we'll talk a little bit about why is that difficult in ministry when you come with a personality that's a little more bold. There's a lot of, in the religious system, in the religious mindset, there's a lot of judgments, or people judge people like that. Well, they're too bold and they're too whatever. And that's a big part within the religion, when you get into religion, where you start to criticize and judge people for really who they are. Like, it's a gift to be bold and to see things differently and be willing to speak into that. That's a gift, and not everybody can do that. And we need people who are willing to face things that are not right and that are not pure and face them head on. We need people like that. But instead, culturally, and through religion, the church has really unfortunately played a part in this, where they shut that gift down in people. And so when they have that gift, they get frustrated because they can't use it, and then that tension is building up in them. And so we'll talk about that probably more in video 2, part 2. So look for part 2 if you're just seeing this. There'll be a part 2 coming. But yeah, it's a gift that he carries, and his father as well. Yeah.
So all that to say that caused a lot of frustration within my father.
Yeah.
And given some other dynamics that were going on in the home that were kind of negative, that frustration bled out into forms of abuse and just dysfunction and things like that. And so that was kind of the environment I grew up in. And part of that is we were never at any one church for very long. So my experience was, we'd go to a church, you just start to get to know people, and then all of a sudden there's some type of offense or some issue happens, and then we're gone. Whether that was on my father's side or the church's side or somewhere in the middle, it's irrelevant really for the sake of this story. But that was the environment that I grew up in, and that coupled with my parents divorce and remarriage and divorce and remarriage to each other. And then, just different dynamics like that going on. It was a very turbulent childhood. And so that was my initial experience with religion. And, in my mind, religion became this thing where I understood it's very powerful, but I also understood its capacity to hurt people.
Yeah.
And I was just kind of like, no, I don't think I'm going to go down that road. I think I'm going to leave that alone. That was my dad's thing. I'm going to do my own thing. And so I walked away from any kind of relationship with the Lord. I walked away from any semblance of faith that I had, any experience, whatever. And during my teenage years, till about, my early 20s, maybe. Just living out in the world, doing all the worldly stuff, all the typical stuff. Just getting involved in things that people should not be involved in. By the grace of God, I didn't end up dead or in prison. So,
He's got stories on that one. That is the grace of God.
Yeah.
That's another video. It's amazing.
So yeah, God really protected me, and just looking back, it's just amazing. It's like, wow.
Yeah.
So lots of protection. God really had His hand on my life, even though I was running away from Him, really.
Yeah.
And I remember it had to be 2002, 2003. That summer, I remember. It was me and a friend of mine. I lived in a trailer park at the time, and I was just really in a place where I was dissatisfied with my life because I wasn't doing anything with my life. Just working, working a job, paying bills, and
that's interesting.
That's kind of,
wasn't doing anything with my life. There is a need in all of us to be a part of something greater. And you can see people that are searching on what does that look like for them, and that's where we want to help you get into your promised land, where you discover what your purpose, because you're here for a bigger need to make a difference.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. Okay.
So, like I said, wasn't doing anything with myself, and it was me and a buddy. It was about 3 a.m. if I remember right, and we're sitting on the front porch of my little trailer in the trailer park, and we're drinking, and we're not like having social, we're pretty far into the bottle at this point, so
pretty wasted.
Yeah, pretty wasted. And my friend looks at me and he asks me this ridiculous question, and it just came out of nowhere. And he looks at me, he goes, "Where do you want to be in 5 years?" And I'm like, who even says that? That's like an infomercial for, Recruiter or something. It's just this weird statement.
We ask people that all the time now.
Yeah.
It's a question you should be asking yourself.
Yeah, and it was just kind of one of these weird moments, and I thought about it, and at that moment I had this mental, I don't like calling it a vision, but it was a mental picture, okay? It's just like I saw myself in an all-black shirt with one of these priest collars. That was the vision or the mental picture that I had in that moment. Now here I am, 3 a.m. in a trailer park, drunkard and all snot, and this is the image when I think about my future. This is what comes to me.
So was it a priest, or like what did you see?
It was a priest. It was a priest. And I looked at, and I knew enough. I knew enough that I'm like, well, I'm not Catholic, so it's not going to be a priest. I know that much. But I looked at him and I go, I think I'm going to be a preacher. And again, the scenario is just a crazy scenario. And that summer, God really got a hold of me. It had to be 03, I think. I don't know. Anyway, I get dates messed up. But that summer, the Holy Spirit started working on me. I was just so dissatisfied with the things I was doing. I just wouldn't do them anymore. I remember making this big announcement, telling everybody that I'm going back to my faith. I said, I had made a secret vow to God, and in this vow, I told him, I was like, okay, if you're real, I'm going to be all in for 12 months. Mm-hmm. And if I give everything I have to you for 1 year, and you don't come through, then we're even. I owe you nothing. I don't have to mess with you no more. So.
Wow. And here he is, like, we've been married for 12 years, so I don't know how long that's been, but that's amazing.
So, and I remember typing up this whole thing. I'd have to dig it out, I'm sure I still have it. But we had this big barbecue, and I made this big presentation to all of my friends.
It is really neat what you did.
I told them, and I read this whole decree that I had typed up that, it's just super formal.
He's amazing like that.
Yeah,
though,
but I made
everything's done well, and I love that.
I made this whole declaration to everybody I knew, and I said, I'm going to start pursuing my faith. And I said, there's things I might be doing today that I'm not going to be doing in the future. I'm going to be, trying to clean my life up and all this kind of stuff. And everybody was like really impressed. They're like, oh, that's awesome. Mm-hmm. And I think maybe a lot of people thought it was cute. A lot of people thought it might not last.
Again, everyone's got an opinion. Everyone has their thoughts, and your life cannot define what other people think. Your life is for you and to know where you're going.
Yeah. So, but it was interesting because as time progressed, people saw that I was serious. And then it kind of became an issue. I remember going over visiting a friend of mine. He says, how long are you going to do this church thing, this Jesus thing? Mm-hmm. And I go, this is who I am now. And that kind of severed that relationship. And then just throughout time, I had to leave a lot of friendships. Now, thankfully, in the grace of God, since we've all matured, I've been able to come back to some of those relationships, and some of those have been restored, have been very positive. But at the time, it's like, I can't hang out with you drinking. I can't hang out with you chasing girls. I can't be getting involved in illicit things and all this kind of stuff no more, because that's not where I'm trying to take my life. So at that, that summer, those decisions, and during that course of time, that season, started attending a church. Was super hungry, because I had made a commitment that for 12 months I'm going to be all in. I'm not holding anything back, because I knew if I held something back and I didn't test God, so to speak, to see if he was the real deal or not, because I was holding back, that wasn't going to be fair. That wasn't going to be fair to myself.
That's good. That's good.
So I was all in, super hungry, just learning a ton. Just really falling in love with the Lord, falling in love with the Spirit, with his presence, learning all kinds of things. Ended up becoming, started serving in a church, became deacon, moved up to elder, started getting involved in leadership, then doing some lay ministry stuff and all these things. And really got very steeped in religion. And it was interesting because God kind of had me on walking this dual path, so to speak. So I'm really entrenched in, the Western religious structured model thing, right? I'm super, super involved in that. But then circumstance and events caused me to get involved in this house church. And that's where I really grew. So I was getting fed a lot of faith or a lot of information, rather. A lot of information, a lot of Bible knowledge, great stuff. Learned a lot in the institutional church. But over here in this house church, my faith was being fed. That's awesome. And so it was really an interesting set of circumstances, because Wednesday and Sunday I'm over here, and then Friday nights, and you got to keep in mind I'm in my 20s, I'm a single guy. And Friday night, I'm not hanging out in the streets or the bars. I'm going to Bible study. Yeah. So you can imagine my friends in my previous context, those weren't compatible. So it was kind of a lonely time for many years, because that's what I was about. But God was really feeding my faith, and ended up discovering some gifts that I had and was able to use them, which was super important. And developing those, had some great mentors and some great faith-filled people, spirit-filled people around me to nurture me and help me grow and navigate. And I did that for several years, and then kind of the lure of traditional ministry kind of caught me. And looking back, that's probably, if I don't have a lot of regrets in my life, but one of them was kind of not sticking with that house church model for longer. And I think maybe just God, everything's in God's timing. He knows what's going on. So, I don't lose sleep over it, but I did get lured away by the call of more traditional ministry.
If we go back to when you were going to home church and, you were in traditional church as well, he said he was single, but he ended up getting married during that time, not to me. He ended up getting married. Do you want to plug in a little bit of this is while he's going to church? So he's in a place where he knows he's got to get his life right with God. He was living with a lady. Yeah.
So ended up, the girl that I was living with ended up getting married because, again, God's got me on this path, and I'm looking, okay, I'm going to church on Sunday, I'm serving, but my lifestyle is not lining up with Scripture.
Yeah,
right?
With what God
And so
teaches,
I'm like,
right.
okay, I'm either going to have to break this relationship or marry the girl because we're sleeping together, all this kinds of stuff. Get married and end up having a child, had a child together, but again, me pursuing the Lord and her not wanting to have any part of that experience, which in hindsight I can't fault her because it was super religious and just kind of oppressive environment anyway. But that drove us apart, and so ended up getting divorced. And so again, I was just a single guy, had a kid now, my wonderful daughter.
So here he is growing in his faith, and at the same time faces a divorce. So even when you're growing in your faith, sometimes you're going to hit some of the hardest decisions that you have to make. Yeah. But God uses it to mature you, and He uses it to grow you. And like he said, that there was some things that you can't really falter for not wanting to get plugged in, because there was mistakes that even he knows that he made in that previous marriage where he would have done things differently.
Oh yeah.
But it's all about maturing, and it's all about growing.
Yeah. So had a child during that time, and again was just trying to do my very best to pursue the Lord and to keep growing. And it was actually in the church that I met my beautiful wife.
Yep.
So she stalked me. She stalked me. Just so you all
we're
know.
going to end with how we met, because it's interesting. It just goes to feed on, yeah.
So, I don't know what else.
Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah, so just was stuck in religion for many, many years.
Yeah.
That caused the severing of not only some relationships, but even some family. Because what I didn't realize is while I was chasing God and pursuing the Lord, my faith was growing in the home church, and then I was getting a lot of knowledge here. But what I didn't realize is that when I went to that lure, I allowed myself to be lured by the potential of ministry, right? This traditional ministry model. Yeah,
this church. You can become a pastor, and you build up this great church, and that whole
that whole thing lured me, and that caused some severances with family members, some offenses with other friends, and I just I got really prideful, really elitist, and just really religious. Very, very rigid and unbending and judgmental and all these kinds of things.
So the first love that you once had, that you were thriving in the home church, almost began to lose that first love. The more you got steeped into religion, the more you walked away from that first love that you once had when you came to know the Lord. Yeah,
it's really looking back at that process is I had this first love, and slowly I abandoned this and that community in favor of becoming a modern Pharisee. Really, that's really what it was. I was elitist. I was judgmental. Looked down my long nose at everybody. If you weren't, that's how it was. And
imagine somebody who has a very strong personality to have that kind of mentality.
Yeah, it just it's like I would call you out on stuff, but really it was so much pride, guys. It was so much pride. So much arrogance, just thinking that because I go to this particular church that somehow I'm super spiritual, and if you're not part of that community, you're lesser than. And so I really had to repent from that, and God has brought me on through quite the journey in that that repentance process. And I guess you don't realize it when you're in it. because I wouldn't think I was that way, but when
you're in it,
get out of that and you look back, it's like,
when you're
wow.
in it and you're in the mindset, you don't recognize that. But God is gracious, and in His timing, He brings all things together.
Yeah,
that's really good.
So,
it's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay.
Why don't you?
I'll give you a little bit of my story, where I grew up at, and what my life, and then we'll end with how we met, and then that will be the foundation of this first video for part 1, and then part 2 will be our continuation through religion together, because I was raised in the church that when he went back, he said that he bounced around through different churches when he was younger. But when he went to serve the Lord, he went back to a church that, didn't you visit when you were younger?
Yeah, my parents, we would frequent this particular church on several occasions. So that was the last church that I had been in.
Okay.
Before I kind of walked away.
So when you wanted to go back, that was where
that's what came to mind. So I said, I'll go there.
The church that he went back to was actually the church I was raised in. So I was raised very young. My earliest memory, had been, I was probably 2 maybe at the church. Raised in the same church my whole life. It was all I knew. I didn't have an opportunity like he has to visit other churches and how they worship. Very unique experiences out there, but I didn't. All I knew was what I had been raised in. And so I was raised, like 2 is my earliest memory. And so for the first few years of my life, I would say from about when I was young till about 10, my parents were very involved at this church. My dad was a trustee. We actually lived 45 minutes away. Actually, my younger years, we lived an hour and a half away from this church. We lived in Kalamazoo. If you know anywhere, that's in Michigan. It was an hour and a half commute that my parents would do Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesdays. And my dad was also in leadership, so he would have midweek meetings. And so we drive an hour and a half one way. That's 3 hours of driving. There was a lot of times where we would actually stay the afternoon in the city, so we didn't have to drive all the way home. We would be back for evening service. There was times we actually stayed in the church all afternoon, and we just hung out there, so we didn't have to drive home to drive back again. Okay, this is how involved my parents were. Amazing parents. My parents raised me very well up until about the age of 12. I have some great memories where they really protected my sisters and I. They really guarded what we watched on TV, the music we listened to, which I think is a great thing that I do with my children today, because I understand the power of the mind and the power of what you watch and how it trains your thinking. And I'm really thankful my parents did do that. They really did protect us from a lot of things in the world. He teases me to this day. He's like, I wasn't allowed to watch Simpsons growing up. Everybody watches Simpsons. I'm like, what is it? I don't know. But they talk really rude to each other. Like, you wonder why your kids are bickering and being disrespectful. They're learning the behavior. So I am really thankful my parents didn't let us watch stuff like that, So I don't have those experiences. And so here my parents are. They do really well. My dad has a business. He had a gas station. It was doing really well. We were thriving financially. We went from literally no finances, where he struggled through some businesses, and then there was some Sundays where on the way home, our hour and a half drive home, they would actually pray to hit a deer so we could eat off this deer for the week. That's how my parents had to work through to get to where they were having a successful, thriving business. Okay. And so raised really well, really protected until about the age of 10 or 12. Some things began to happen and things began to shift. So by the time I was about 10 to 12, right in there, some things began to turn. And what happened, there's a few different things that began to shift in my parents' life, where my mom started to struggle with her health. She started to have some health issues. And obviously at that season, now we have such a variety of natural ways that you can help your body heal, and how to do that. That wasn't very common. We didn't have any social media then. So a lot of this health and wellness. So the only place you turned at that point to get help was the medical system. So they put her on narcotics. And so some things in my home began to really shift. My dad in that season was he was selling the gas station that we'd owned, become very successful with this gas station, to invest into another business. And so it was actually, he was going to invest it with somebody that attended the church with us. So of course you trust the people, they go to church with you and they serve the Lord. And so sometimes, unfortunately, we can get naive and, well, these people are out to help, and, Well, my dad sold the business, invested, and it was a bad business deal, and we lost everything. The guy ended up taking all of the money we had. There was probably some things on my dad's part he could have done different, and he knows that. Needless to say, it's what happened, and we lost everything. So that's the reality my dad had to face. So he started working 60 to 100 hours a week to bring in money to support the home and keep things afloat. Things just spiraled out of control by the time I was about 12 till about, well, it didn't really stop. So about 12, here's my dad lost all this business. So he went from having finances coming in to literally nothing. My mom is having these health issues. There was a point she had a seizure on the way home from church with one of our drive home. She had a seizure in the car. So we had to drive right to a hospital. Very scary experience. And so he's dealing with that. How do you manage all this? And then he loses all that money. And so this is where my parents were at. And what happens is when you get to a hard time like that, you have a choice where you let bitterness and different things grow in you. And my dad recognized there were some areas where he was hurt from the gentleman that took all of this bad business deal that happened. He was very hurt by it. And working all these hours, they ended up stop attending church. Pretty much just walked away from God is what they did. It wasn't about church. They walked away from their faith. They literally did walk away from their faith. No more were they guarding the home at that point. We could kind of go and do what we wanted. I literally went from this home that was raised with strong faith, even though a lot of it was steeped in religion, and we're going to get into that in part 2 about some of those mindsets. We went from this home that was steeped in, with faith. They had a good relationship. My mom was an amazing prayer warrior, like amazing. I literally went from that to a drug home. Literally. I smoked weed with my parents, you guys. It was a drug home, okay? It's kind of crazy, the experience.
It's a big transition.
It's a huge transition. So I can see from both perspectives, okay? And there is things that were great here, but not the religious mindset. And that's what we're going to talk about in part 2, okay? So there was things that were great here when they were walking with their faith with God. But when religion stepped in, that's when things began to shift, and just like he talked a little bit about. Now we went into this experience where my mom's now addicted to narcotics because they've got her on narcotics for pain and different things like that. My dad's working all these hours. Well, working like that's going to tear your body apart. Duh. Like nobody's designed to work 100 hours a week. You're not. Your physical body cannot handle that. Yeah. So he started tearing his body apart, would go through some shoulder surgeries, different things. So now he's on narcotics. So both my parents are addicted to Oxycontin. I don't even know. Delant, I think is one of them. Yeah, there's a lot of them that they were addicted to. Okay, so my mom, I actually remember this was December of 2003. December of 2003. It might have been in November. Some things had happened, and we had to take my mom into what you would call the psych ward of the hospital. Okay, she was really taking too much medicine, and it was messing with her processing, and she was a completely different person. Like the mom I grew up with, this was different. Like my mom used to make homemade bread. We had a great clean house. It was crazy, guys. So December of 2003, it might have been November, we had to take her in, and she actually got detox from all of these drugs. Okay, I remember taking her. I was the one that had to take her in. And at this point, I guess I'll backtrack. So my parents went from protecting us. When I turned 16, that's when I was forced into sex, and I was raped at the age of 16. That started me on a very promiscuous journey. 17, I was pregnant. Okay, I was pregnant at 17, and then I got pregnant again at 19. Okay, by 2 different guys. So by the time I took my mom, this was 2003. I actually had 2 kids at that time. And I took her in, and I saw a side of her I never saw before. And she actually called me some names that hurts to this day, but I know it wasn't her that was speaking. It was the enemy that was really speaking through her, that had a hold on her life. But she called me some names. My parents never called us names, never downgraded us as kids, never. They did not raise us in that kind of a home where you stupid, what are you thinking? It breaks my heart when I see parents do this because it's tearing their kids down. My parents did not do that, and I'm so grateful. And I've learned not to do that with my kids. Well, it shifted, and I was totally horror, all these different names and swear words, and and it was painful. And so we put her in. She got detoxed, and she came out by Christmas of 2003. And the guy that I was dating at that time, the father of my second child, he told me, he goes, I've never seen your mom like this. Like, she cooked a Christmas dinner. It was amazing. Like, it was like I had my mom back. It was bizarre. And that was December of 2003. January 28 of the next year, 2004, my mom started taking the drugs again. Okay, and what happens is when you actually cleanse your body and detox it of all those heavy drugs and you go to take it again, you actually will shock your system. I don't think she knew that. She obviously did not know that. Well, what she did is she had an accidental drug overdose. She died. It was January 28 of 2004. She actually died. We found her middle of the night, passed away. She was dead on the bathroom floor. She was like kind of down like this, and my dad went to lean her back, and she was gone. She was gone. So in this journey now, fabulous home that I was raised in, yes, with some religion, to now a drug home. My mom passed away at the age of 43. I have 2 kids, and I was doing all kinds of drugs with my parents, without my parents. I was a lot of things that, if I went on and on about some things that God really used some things to shake me. I remember the last time that I did some serious drugs, I don't remember what it was. It was cocaine. I think it was cocaine maybe. I don't remember. That was, my daughter was 2 years old, my firstborn, and she was born with some health issues. And I remember when she had to go in to get brain surgery that night. And I had to call my friend because I was so high on drugs. I couldn't even think, and I couldn't be a mom. I called my friend. I said, will you go and pretend as you're her the mom? I can't do this. And it so shook me. I never went back to that lifestyle. I never again touched those extreme drugs. And I'm so grateful, by the grace of God, I had my daughter. And she had health issues, and no, that wasn't fun to walk that road. But if it wasn't for that, it wouldn't have shook me enough to wake me up to let that stuff down. I don't know what road I would have been on to this day. But she went in for brain surgery that night, and that she was born with health issues. Before she was born, I didn't do any drugs, so I don't even know why. Like, it was just God's grace using this to help me. But that shook me enough to wake me up, and that took me on a road a couple of years later where I started to get discontent with my life. And I remember a couple of years later, I don't know what year it was, I'd have to figure it out, but I sat on the end of my bed. I was on the floor at the end of my bed, and I just sat down. I said, God, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. I'm not happy. And I knew when I was happiest the most was when, as much as my parents were into religion, it was when they had a relationship with God. And I knew I needed to go back to that place. God gave me a verse. And He said that He will complete every good work that He starts. And that has been my motto, my faith since then. It's been literally the thing that has helped me, that He completes every good work that He starts. And I knew if I went back to the faith that my parents once had, made it my own, discovered what this relationship with God was about, I knew He was going to complete what He started in me as a little girl, because He gave me dreams as a little girl. I knew my life was here for different. I knew it from the time I was probably about the age of 4. God gave me a vision. And I knew my life was here for different. And I had been running and sorting through my own emotions and my own thoughts, but really learning to see life from a different perspective. And sometimes you got to walk through the hard stuff to see a different perspective. You start to have understanding and mercy for people. So that's a little bit of my journey. So I went, at that point, I started going back to the church I grew up. That was what I knew. It was the same church he was going to. I started going back because that was the last experience I had when I was in a relationship with God. And in the beginning years of going back, I was so on fire for God. I was so excited to search Him, to know Him, to hear Him. He'd wake me up in the middle of the night and give me scriptures to look at. It was like the relationship was just so close. It was so close. And that's what I had when I went back. And then because I had 2 kids and he had a daughter, he started chasing me at church.
She chased me first.
So I started going back, and then I noticed him. He was actually standing behind what they would call is, like, I don't know, like as a desk that their deacons would stand behind.
It's like a help information / security thing. I don't know. It
just means that you're helping.
Yeah.
You're volunteering.
Yeah.
But for me, I knew, okay, he's volunteering. He's committed. There was something that was different when I still remember the first time I saw him and just knew, okay, there's something different about this guy right here. And it was at that point that I started kind of watching him. I don't know if you saw me at that point or not.
I don't quite
I don't know,
remember.
'cause
I remember noticing you because I was like, she doesn't look like the rest of the girls around here. So,
But what really drew me to him is there was something different about him. He had a hunger and a passion for God that you don't find in a lot of people. And my spirit, I just knew it. And so we've, worked through a lot of things. I mean, at this point, we still have a lot of our garbage. We haven't grown up through our garbage at this point.
Yeah,
So we have some maturing to do and some growing to do. We've done it together. Thankfully, God has brought resources to help us to grow and to mature us. So there's some things we definitely would have done differently when we met each other, whatever.
Probably a lot of things.
Anyways, that's another video. But yeah, so that was how we met. And so that really is the beginning of what's going to be part 2. Because we want to share our journey with you through the religious system. So at this point, I'm experiencing God and my faith is really high in this intimate relationship with God. But then there is a point where I start to go more depth into the religious model, into the religious system, that I lose my first love that I once had. Okay? And so we're going to talk about our experience through this religious model, through this religious system. But I want you to know what we come from as the foundation before you move to part 2. Because you really got to know the story you come from so you can see a big picture of where God is taking you, okay? We both come from very unique religious experiences, and that's why we know that God has given us a gift to help people become either free from religion or discover, not discover religion, but discover this true faith that He wants to give you, to fall madly in love with Him and seek Him without losing relationships, without divorce, without the pain and what religion can bring. We don't want you to have to go there and experience that. In this place, you should have experiences in your relationships where you're thriving. Yes, there's trials and there's hardships, but you learn how to communicate and navigate through them. That's what we want you guys to experience.
Yeah. I like how you phrase that. Just religion can be very cold and unfeeling, and it separates you from God. We know that sin separates us from the Lord, but religion can also separate you from the Lord, and it's very deceptive in that, because your motivation for even getting involved in religion is, I want to serve the Lord.
Yeah.
And then people say, well, if you want to serve the Lord, this is what you have to do. And then they funnel you into this religious structure, and you either burn out, or your faith becomes cold and hard, and just all these other negative things, and it doesn't really lead you to the life
of what
that
you're really searching for.
Yeah.
So you get trapped in this religious model, but you're still searching, you're still looking, you're not satisfied. You're not satisfied when you get back to this religious model. Yeah. You're still looking. And that's why we talked about this is our journey from religion into our promised land. Because I truly believe there's people that are in the religious system that are searching for the promised land. They're searching for what does this life look like. And they're not satisfied because they know they're missing something. There's still a part they're missing. And they are. You're trapped in the religious system. And the only reason we can share that is because we've been there.
Yeah.
We've been there. We totally have been there. And now coming out of it, it's like God took the blinders off and we can see. And now that's where we're sharing our experience, in hope that where your blinders, where things that need to come off your eyes, that you can say, God, help me to see clearly.
Yeah. So we will get into a little bit more of that in part 2.
Yes. So please, if search for it. It would be called. We're going to label it as Our Journey Out of Religion. So look for our journey. I don't know what we're going to title it. Out of Religion Part 2.
You'll find it. We'll make it easy.
You'll find it. We'll put a link.
So, all right. See you on the next one.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.